bit more into understanding systems and then how we can change them. And I will be giving you some very practical examples as well, but it's really important that we get our heads around some key concepts. Right, so with mechanisms and mindsets in a process of systems change, there's a couple of key things that can happen in the mechanisms. Understanding where the leverage points are. Where's the leverage point in that system that is the highest, that access point or that leverage point that's a high, that if I act there, there's a much higher chance that I can change that structure and change that system. Donnell and Meadows works on this a lot. To see leverage points, you need to have a perspective of the whole system. And this is one of the big things that's lacking in a lot of areas of activism. As much as I love the earth and I love environmentalists, but they're all working in silos and they're not seeing the system and they're not seeing how to hit the leverage points of that system. Another very interesting one and that has a lot of fascinating case studies is acupuncture points. So a system acupuncture point is where you can hit with and change the most with the least amount of resistance. So very interesting. I'm going to give you some case studies. Third thing that's really important, so any system of oppression, it's divide and conquer, right? And remember going back to our thing at the beginning where that you have to stabilize into a new state. Integral processes. And even, Dr. Smitsman is the woman who did her PhD in systems change. Integral processes are the affordance, that coherence capacity that affords you the ability to move from one system into the other. And integral processes are not about your individual self and it's an interluminating system of inter-awareness. How does our initiatives cooperate and work together? How do we breed all these individual initiatives so that they solidify into an alternative system, right? There's some amazing work on that. I hope to inspire you with some amazing work that's being done in these areas. And I want to thank you because I'm trying to take a lot of really complex literature and simplify it. So if I'm using new words and new language, it's because I'm trying to take some complex stuff and simplify it. So you're doing really well. Okay, so leverage points, acupuncture points, integral processes, and the key thing that systems change is based on, if you want to align social and natural systems, is whole systems architecture. I'm going to go back to the metaphor of the individual. If you just value yourself as your work, if you just value your emotions and not practicalities, you need to value spiritual, psychological, emotional, physical. How do I manifest it? In order to change yourself in a whole systems way, otherwise it becomes imbalanced and you're going to get another systems problem, right? So whole systems architecture and ecosystems, natural systems, all operate according to whole systems architecture. There are people that have mapped this out, so if you want to do whole systems architecture, there's like key questions you ask, but I'm not going to go into that because I'm just trying to explain the key things in moving out of where we are. So integral processes are all based on whole systems architecture. In order to see leverage points, acupuncture points, you have to look at the whole systems architecture. Right, so those are some of the key mechanisms in systems change. Mechanisms and mindsets, right? They go together because we institutionalize what we understand. We behave according to what we understand. Essentially, systems change, therefore, is a values revolution. What brings people together most strongly? Values. What is an organization based on? Values. So we have to, all of this healing work, like, what's going on at the yurt and things like, it's really, really important for us to do that individually and collectively. And we need to ask ourselves, what are the values that we want this world to be based on? Do you want constant consumption? Do you want that level of consumerism? Do you believe that, people of certain races are above other people? Do we really want that? Like, what kind of world do we want? What kind of values do you want? And really spell it out. It's a very interesting process doing this in community groups, because there's so much unspoken, and a lot of the value stuff that we're going to talk about how to act on multiple levels. One is the micro level. One is everyday, right? This is something that, I'm going to make this very actionable for everybody. But part of it is just taking something that's meaningful to a group, something that they see every day that has a real everyday resonance for them, right? And showing it to them and being like, what's actually happening here? Just hang on, shh, get out of the social neurosis. Like, what's actually happening here? And then people will start to talk, because there's a lot that we take for granted. There's a lot of assumptions. A lot of it making visible the invisible, explicitizing what's not explicit, right? And just shaking it up, and people do come out in their humaneness. And they're like, yeah, no, actually that isn't right, and we shouldn't do that. And then we have to do this, try to do this as much as possible. It is a values revolution that's done in the micro, everyday life, meso, organizational level, macro, that's the larger, systems. Individual behavioral change is not intellectual. For an individual to change, it happens on multiple levels, right? So it's not just something you read. There has to be an experience. It's socially reinforced. It's personally reinforced. It happens on multiple levels. Collective change is very, very similar. So I just want you to have that visual in mind. So this is a system to change systems. How do we get out of where we are? And how can we potentially, from what is really, really oppression and violence, go into a state of thriving? It's that kind of process. We're going to be changing our posture. We're going to have a new reference for a new kind of experience. We're going to learn to operate and move in a different way and come into a state of alignment. Where are we now? So, calling it really what it is. They're either unhealthy systems, they are failed systems in terms of they're not able to do what they should do. A healthcare system should provide care, well-being, or a financial system should provide resources for all. They're not doing that. Or they are violent, going back to structural violence, right? So actively inflicting harm. And I'm not going to go into an in-depth analysis of the economic system because, it's partially out of my competency, but I can definitely talk about it, from a systems perspective. And definitely, if you look in the literature of global health, structural violence is most often economically driven. Restrictive system. So I'm going to give you a couple of case studies. One will be in the legal system. So restrictive system, it's not actively causing harm, but it restrains your agency. So literally you're in a situation where it's not direct harm inflicted, but there's just nothing you can do. It restricts your ability to do anything. Okay, so it's not structurally violent, but it's restraining agency. So how does this stuff happen? How do we, I want to talk about a historical thing in terms of how did we get into this situation, but how does it work? How do all these things work? Any institution, any system, we institutionalize what we understand. So the first thing is mechanisms and mindsets. These are two things that are intertwined. Reductionalist, right? Reducing people to consumers and producers. So the opposite of reductional would be valuing the multiple dimensions of experience, the multiple perspectives, the multiple dimensions of life. But we reduce it. Reductionalist. Mechanistic goals. Unsustainable incentives. Just consumerism and non-stop growth on a finite planet. And to have a system that incentivizes that and incentivizes mass behavior. So you're literally being mobilized by a social system. I mean, it depends how you decide to carve out your life and respond to it. That's an unsustainable value, and it's an incentive of the system. So a big part of systems change is addressing systems incentives. So that's some of the mechanisms in the structures. So now I want to talk about their qualities. And I don't know how many of you have read Paulo Freire. He's a big influence of mine, but I'm going to just touch on the key topics from him. Because in terms of the mindsets, there's some important things that he brought up that do translate across both system sciences and social sciences, which is my thing.
Sorry, what was his name?
Paulo Freire, F-R-I-E-R-E. Okay, so key things that he talks about. So once again, I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just showing you a thinking process. Freire worked with the downtrodden of the downtrodden with a grassroots approach in giving them the key skills to overthrow their oppressors. And there's a couple of key things that he noticed, and this ties into very importantly in systems change. Dialogic versus anti-dialogic. So oppression is, you do what I say. There's no dialogue. Anything liberational, and definitely a systems change, is highly dialogic. One of the characteristics of healthy systems is that they are very dialogic and they breed more and more coherence through a dialogic process. Just think about how many years ago you could talk to someone and now you get like, press 1, press 2, press 3. It's actually an anti-dialogue. There's no human there to talk to, right? So, and that's just one example of like anti-dialogue. Second is the narrative structure. So is that a propagated narrative that we're propagating, or is that a narrative that's being generated? There's a very big difference. A narrative that's being generated, you're generating it through direct experience. And Freire talks about the banking model of knowledge, so information that is deposited into you, right? This is very linked to oppression and oppressive structures. They're propagating a narrative and they're, putting knowledge into you. A liberational approach would be, instead of something deposited into you, you're generating it through direct experience. You're generating it through your own reflections. You're generating it through your dialogues and conversations with others. One of my favorite knowledge systems. So I guess because of the academic background that I have, and please keep me posted on time because I have 2 more pages. Okay. This is something that happens over and over and over again in every single social movement, but people don't notice it consciously. It's the knowledge change. So if we're going to go up against, major institutions, corporations, organizations, I want us to have the most powerful tools possible, okay? Because, if I'm standing here with, like, a home-based vacuum cleaner and they've got a nuclear weapon, like, who's the... right? But this has happened because we can get so passionate, and I've seen activists burn out. I want you to have powerful tools, okay? So knowledge transformations are very, very powerful. Reordering knowledge. And reordering knowledge happens in almost every single social transformation that's taken place. The reordering of thinking, the re-conceptualization that turns into a different process of action, but also, who's the author? In the word author is authority. I'm going to give you an example from the global health movement. The AIDS movement. We're really pissed off about the prices of what it took to deal with AIDS. And these people who were literally like, blacks and Latinos from the slums of America said, fuck this, we're going to figure it out. They became the authority. They invented their own remedies. They went there into the clinics like, we did the research, we figured it out. This is how the medicine has to be created. This is how it can be distributed properly. This is how we can stop it. They became the new authority. They were at the same level of knowledge as the clinics and the doctors and the whatever that were handling AIDS. They became the new knowledge power. This is so important. These are big, big things that I think we really need to make some key courses on, because it's powerful tools. all of a sudden, and they didn't start a major organization and spend loads of money, they just became the new authority. So many times we get involved in and understandably so, in the ideology. Structural literacy will show you what is the modus operandi, how does it work, how does the mechanics of that oppression work, so that you become literate in reading the structure. Collaborative literacy. Collaboration literacy is interesting. This came out of violence in South London, where they were like, police did a great job, social care services did a great job, families did a great job, charities did a great job. It's getting worse. Why? We don't know how to collaborate. Right? And so collaboration literacy is literally, it's a 3-day program, and you have to learn that inwardly. And because a lot of, even when you examine partnerships, if you say we're in partnership, there's nothing collaborative happening. The partnership's doing nothing, right? Literate in collaboration, literate in reading structures, literate in transformation. What are the key things about transformation? I don't want to keep putting people down. There's a lot of talk on change, and not that much of it is really genuinely transformational, right? So understanding the arc of transformation, the key transformation process, going through a transformation yourself, right? Very important. We have to be literate in these things, right? Yeah. And we do a full dialogue, so I'm no longer the center, right? Seeing power. Second thing is there's definitely a lot of healing and trauma release that needs to happen, which you can do intensively with someone else, but on a daily basis, noticing body language, noticing where you're tense. Sometimes I don't talk about trauma. It's like, I'm just gonna open the window. I think people are just getting, noticing those kind of dynamics, engaging critical thinking. Like I said, if you're just having, a coffee with someone and they're talking about what are they taking for granted? Because one of the big things you deal with is people saying, oh yeah, that's just the way the world is. What can you do to flag something up and bring something up? What do you think is really happening there? What do you think you can do about this? Engaging critical thinking, engaging empowerment. These are good things that happen on the micro, and definitely your personal praxis. If you're not in an authentic relationship with yourself, you're not going to lead a single soul. And if you're not going through your own transformation, you're not going to understand what transformation is, and therefore what it might look like in the collective. So those are some key things on the micro level.
You did say as well that there's lots of things. So, I mean, I'm particularly interested in the educational system and change within that.
Yeah.
And it's funny actually because I've sort of been battling with it for about 2 years. Like, what can I do? And that's as far as I've got. I've gone, what can I do? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Until I realised actually there's already other people out there already starting the change, and I've kind of found a couple now.
Yeah.
That I'm going to be sharing.
Yeah, so educational system, this is more meso, macro, right? So it's like because as individuals, we're surrounded by our social system. You're surrounded by the circumstances of your daily life, right? So when anything in the meso or meso macro, you're gonna look to groups, right? I worked for an amazing project that was working to change the educational system, changing trainings for teachers and parents. So literally deep stuff in how we mold people. And it's all interdisciplinary, and it's all like human development based. So it's about finding those and then doing that integral process, right? With this. So that's more on the meso level. All of this ties into those new literacies and capacities, because we've been trained to be disempowered. We've been trained to rely on the system. We've been trained, don't trust your personal power. No, you can't make that level of change. Right, so that's the personal level of like detoxing and reclaiming yourself. And then if you're gonna look in the educational system, yeah, it's a lot about this campfire stuff. It's a lot about finding those people that are doing that, what pieces you can take, how you can start to work integrally. There's a lot of people changing, and empowerment is collective. I was very disempowered as I was a teacher. Like, I'm being given hell for staying after class trying to help people. And I was very empowered to see the amount of teachers and schools and initiatives that are changing education in such a profound way. I was like, what? Like, I would be exhausted after class, and I'd be like, I'm just trying to help people, and this is never my intention. And then you get empowered by others, and then you join others, and you walk into a different collective space that's operating differently. And you're like, what is this new way of operating, right? This is so there's, and in terms of like how to engage with that, engaging with different initiatives, then they all go through that integral process of becoming more, it has to become coherent enough so it really becomes the alternative system. So a lot of this, what to do, I know I spoke very briefly about the literacies and capacities, but they're so transformative because all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a lot I can do. Oh, there's a lot already going on, and I just join it, right? So I hope that answers your question without rambling.
just a bit point about recently I saw a film called Planet Local.
Plant local.
Planet Local, and it's about localization. Maybe many people have seen it.
It's a great film.
Talking about divide, conquer, and the
Yeah, yeah.
polarization. So something the value most people can agree on. So instead of disagree, and I found very certain subject very untouchable.
Yeah.
So something we can most likely agree on. And,
Local stuff is great. There's a lot of axis points. The axis between micro and meso, the axis points between, I didn't go into that level of complexity. Local stuff is fantastic, right? It's micro and meso level change because you're changing a system, right? By doing things all locally.
Kind of idea of the there's a tendency we disagree on and arguing, so somehow something we can start from what we can connect and agree on to begin with at human level.
Absolutely.
That might be I can think of as a micro level.
Embodied way shower, all right? Just embodying a different way of life, right? This is real. This is one of the biggest things you can do on the micro level. I'm not going to get into axis points on that kind of complex stuff, but right. So if you have like the off the grid stuff, it's micro, but it's also meso level because you're changing a social organization. There's lots you can do, and like initiatives like this are fantastic. So
can I throw a couple of points in?
Yeah,
before
sure.
a lot of people think. As well as everything you said, I think there's 2 points just to throw in here, which sort of relate to what you say. I think one is you talk about integral process.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's so many. I don't know. You said there's so many. I mean, there's literally countless initiatives on our side, if you like, happening right now. And there's big campaigns. There's what Pete and Dan and Dan's all their organisations that people are doing stuff. But you had like the Better Way conference earlier this year.
Yeah.
You've got an international network doing stuff. You've got in the US, and there's tons of examples, just a couple more. You look in the US, you've got the Libertarian Party.
Integral processes are very few.
They're going like win, and Steve Turley and that. And you think, well, Russell Brand and all, there's loads of these people and you can have mixed views, but why don't we, okay, now what can I do? Why don't we, if we join together, we'll just crush them.
Our current social systems are dualizing, polarizing, like including the aid infrastructure, including the charity infrastructure,
forget that, they're all corrupt, aren't they? But I mean, the real,
even people don't have
side.
collaboration literacy. It's really, really strange. People that you think should, because we're not bred that way.
Yeah.
Even in our schooling systems, we specialize and we isolate knowledge. We're not taught interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, we're not taught systems thinking.
Yeah.
When I talk about systems thinking, you're seeing the whole system.